This is Joe Carpenter. Today is May the 13th, 2021, and I'm interviewing Mark Latham for the first time. This interview is taking place at Mark Latham's home in Arlington, Texas. This interview is sponsored by the College of Liberal Arts and is part of the Maverick Veterans Voices Project. Thank you for allowing me to come in your home and interview you.
Pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Where are you from originally, and what can you tell me about your growing up?
Well, I was born in Bitburg, Germany, in a military family. Mm-hmm. So kids in the military are sometimes called military brats.
Right.
And the term brat basically comes from a British term of British Regiment Accompanied Traveler, family status.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that.
Okay, but it's applied, and even now they say that we have many homes. So I've lived in Germany, obviously, mm-hmm. and around the United States. But my permanent home has always been Arlington, Texas.
I see. Okay. And where'd you go to high school?
I went to high school in Berlin, Germany, Leavenworth, Kansas, and Columbus, Georgia.
Were you involved in ROTC in any of those high school situations?
When I went to Leavenworth High School, it was mandatory for all male students, first-year male students, to enroll in ROTC. About the middle part of the year, my father was transferred to Fort Benning, Georgia, and they had ROTC, so I took ROTC 2 years out of 4 years of high school.
Okay. Were any of your family members in the military?
Yes.
Tell me about them.
Okay. My father was in the Army. He was in the Navy prior to that. And I have an uncle who served as an infantry officer also. I think my grandfather was in the Navy in the World War I era. But I'm the only one. My brother has gone was in the Army, mm-hmm. served as a sergeant in the 82nd Airborne. Mm. And so we have some military connections, yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit. How did you yourself become interested in the military?
Well, I thought as a kid always I would be a soldier like my father. When I got ready to graduate from high school, I was draft eligible. Vietnam was on. Mm. And so I decided I didn't have any particular civilian career interest really. So I planned or stated to my father that I wanted to join the Marines when I got out of high school. And he was supportive of that, but then he just simply said it might be better for you to go to university and take a commissioning program and serve as an officer. And this is what I did.
Okay. Well, why did you choose the University of Texas at Arlington?
We were living in Columbus, Georgia, or Fort Benning, Georgia. Mm-hmm. I was not college ready, I have to mm-hmm. say. I was a resident of Texas because of my family's permanent home of record. And we knew of the university in Arlington. Sure. We knew it as UTA, as ASC, Arlington State College, right. and North Texas Agricultural College.
Sure.
So we had family ties. My parents met at NTAC. My father was commissioned through ROTC at NTAC. Mm-hmm. My uncle was commissioned into the Army from Arlington State College. Mm-hmm. And I'd say my grandmother worked in the registrar's office at Arlington State College.
Oh, I don't guess I knew that. That's interesting.
So we have a family connection.
Yeah, very much so. That's a pretty deep family connection. And did you participate in ROTC at UTA?
Yes, I did. I enrolled I started the first year. As I say, I was draft eligible. Mm-hmm. Vietnam was going. So I took ROTC the first year. I got a 3-year scholarship, which basically means I signed an enlistment contract for 6 years. And at the end, I managed to graduate as a distinguished military graduate. So did all right, I guess.
So the purpose of the enlisting and owing 6 years, explain that a little bit, because that's not something that's come up.
Well, I have a copy of the contract, and this comes from my military records.
Mm-hmm.
But in August 1973,
Mm-hmm.
I had to sign this contract to get a 3-year scholarship, and
Okay.
it basically said I am enlisted for a period of 6 years in the Army Reserve, and if I break that contract, I can be called to active duty in war or national emergency without my consent.
I see. So you would be enlisted at that point.
Well, I was enlisted, although I think they just referred to us as cadet.
Okay.
But it was good scholarship.
Yeah.
But if you did not complete it,
Right.
then you had active duty. And at the time, Vietnam was going.
Right.
So
I see. What was your major, and why did you choose this major?
I thought I would study liberal arts just as a starting point because I like those types of subjects.
Right.
I started in sociology, but after the first semester, I switched to government, which is now known as political science.
Sure.
But I thought I would do better in those courses, and so that's why I switched. And it turned out it served me very much later, because it taught me how political choices are made and implemented.
Mm-hmm.
And I served in policy and planning roles in my career.
I see. So that really helped then.
Yes, it did.
Was there anyone on the faculty who influenced you?
I always think there were about 5 people who influenced me, and I remember them. The first was Suzanne Katsikas, was my teacher for American government.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Bob Houston was my instructor in the military science department.
Mm-hmm.
Dennis Reinhardt taught Russian history. Charles Dodge taught geology. Dan Burkholder taught music appreciation. And then there was an international student who I heard called Assad.
Uh-huh.
He was a member of the Iranian Student Association.
Right.
And they were, I saw him one time give a speech at a demonstration to where he was unmasked as he spoke, and his colleagues told him, Assad, put your mask on. The Savak is out there.
Mm.
There was another Iranian student group which was more in favor of the government in Iran, the Shah.
Sure.
And so they felt that there were secret police people observing this, and Assad was speaking without a mask, and that just struck me very singular as being. I was impressed.
Extremely courageous.
So I never forgot him. I don't know anything. His name Assad means lion,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought, well, I always remembered him. So.
Yeah, how fitting. What year did you graduate?
Graduated in 1976. Commissioned and graduated on the same day.
And what was your branch and specialty?
I was in the infantry. I started in the infantry. Later on, I transferred to special forces.
Mm-hmm. And where did you initially go for training, and what was that experience like for you?
I went to Fort Benning for the infantry officers basic course and the ranger course. Good training, a lot of new developments in the Army at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It so happened my father was the commanding general of the infantry center, and so I always felt that people, our colleagues, other people at Fort Benning looked at me to see whether I met the standards that were associated with my father's command.
Right, and that was a high standard to meet.
It was.
Yes.
And not without controversy. Either.
Right, true, and I've read the book. So what was it like having your father in command of the infantry center while you were at Benning. What was that like for you?
Very good example.
Okay. Yeah, I would say so. And certainly that's been echoed by many other people. What were your duties at that time, and did you feel adequately prepared?
When I first, after I finished training at Fort Benning, I was assigned to the 3rd Infantry Division in Germany.
Okay.
So there I was a platoon leader, a scout platoon leader, and a company executive officer. Mm-hmm. I would say that the training at Fort Benning was good to teach me the basic skills, but I learned pretty quickly that you have to develop and apply those skills in the local context.
Oh, yeah.
And U.S. Army Europe is different from U.S. Army Pacific. Sometimes it varies by the command climates, and of course the culture is different. So I did, I think one of the areas that I was not especially trained for was how to evaluate for example, my platoon sergeant. I was an officer with less than a year in service, and I was evaluating a sergeant first class who had been a drill instructor, a combat veteran in Vietnam, and I had to evaluate him.
Interesting.
And that was my first wake up about this, because there's a certain amount of expectations that go along with rating. And as I say, these ratings go to centralized boards.
Right.
So I thought, okay, well, maybe I could have received some instruction. If I did, I don't remember it.
Right.
Because it was a rather important step.
Sure.
I also was involved in a program involving nuclear surety, which had no special training for, but it was... at the time, it was a very important thing, and I'm not sure. I didn't even know these types of programs existed.
Well, how did you come about the knowledge of being able to perform those tasks, whether it's rating an experienced NCO, or how did you come across, or how did you gain the ability to do those things?
Well, some of it, there are on-the-job training.
Right.
We saw that other officers, would be tested in this. You'd have some view of it. When the time came for me to have to do it, there was a very short brigade-sponsored training session about it. It was mainly I don't think you could quite imagine what it's like to be responsible for the employment of these types of weapons.
No, I can't.
The actual technical side of it was done by specialists, but in our case, a lieutenant with a infantry platoon or a scout platoon provided the security and the overall conduct of this program. Was fine when you had a platoon. If I had been tested as a scout platoon, it would no doubt gone very well. As it was, I was an executive officer and was assigned soldiers from all over the battalion with a vehicle that no one was assigned, and we didn't pass.
Oh, wow.
Well, our brigade, and not just our battalion, but our sister battalion, armor battalion, they didn't pass either. So it was one of these things where you think you can put together a team for an important task of which you've never worked before, no matter how good the people are. And the results, I guess, are almost predictable.
Right.
So anyway, I learned a lot from that.
I imagine you did. So the next question is obvious because you just answered it, but I'd like you to expand on it a little bit, and that was, were you assigned or deployed overseas, and where were you assigned?
Okay, in the time that I was in the Army, I served in Europe, the Middle East, and Central America. Now, this was about 5 5 years in Germany in 2 tours, 3 months in Saudi Arabia before anyone was really thinking about it,
Right.
and 2 years in Central America in El Salvador in 2 different assignments.
And Germany was not a Special Forces assignment, but the other 2 were. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, the first assignment to Germany, I was an infantry officer. I served for 3 years. When I went back again, I was a Special Forces officer and a joint specialist, and I served at the Subunified Command, the Special Operations Command, Europe.
I see.
When I went to Saudi Arabia, I was a Special Forces team commander, and we were doing a mobile training team there. And when I went to El Salvador, I was basically picked to be a military trainer, and most of those were Special Forces officers.
Mm-hmm.
So military group El Salvador was not Special Forces, but it was heavily populated with trainers from Special Forces.
Right. And what year was that?
The first time was 1986.
Okay.
The second time was after the peace accords were signed, and trying to think, when was that? Early 90s.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Saudi Arabia, when was?
Saudi Arabia, that was about early 80s.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And did you receive any particular language or cultural training for these assignments?
I received Spanish language training at the Defense Language Institute before going to El Salvador the first time. When I went into Special Forces, all of those units are regionally oriented, and there is a language requirement.
I see.
I never had the opportunity to study formally those languages, but we attempted to self-study.
Right. Right. So Spanish, some.
I would say yes. I was rated as a Spanish linguist. Over the year, I took a defense language tests in Greek and French, and was able to get a memorized level of proficiency.
Right.
But that was all through self-study, or of course, my wife is Greek, so I have learned a bit of Greek that way.
Right. And no Arabic?
Arabic was one of those that we attempted to study.
Yeah.
Never formally trained, but I do know the difference between Arabic and Farsi.
Right.
So
that might be important.
Well, it is important. But it was one of these things that made me question in the regional orientation. The first year I was in Special Forces, our language requirement changed 5 times to 5 different languages.
Oh, my
we
goodness.
attempted to learn them.
Really?
Phrase books, this
Right,
type of thing,
sure.
because to go to the schools meant a significant absence from the unit.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's 5 different languages. Did you serve in a combat role?
No. When I went to El Salvador, that was an advisory role. It was, and they didn't use the word advisor because they wanted to draw no comparisons with Vietnam. Right. So we were called trainers, and they were limited to 55 at any time. That area was an active civil war. There were a few people who were killed there. The place I was assigned was a training center that had been attacked before I got there, resulting in hundreds of deaths of Salvadoran soldiers.
Goodness.
No U.S. there were killed. But that was considered to be a danger area, and we paid danger pay, but not a combat zone. And so later, after my second tour, and the peace accords were signed, they did recognize El Salvador as a place to where some people were eligible for the combat infantry badge. Sure. And we all wore the shoulder insignia for service in El Salvador. It was the Army Mission Unit, and you wear it on the right shoulder. That's considered a combat patch.
I see.
But El Salvador at the time was not designated as a combat
I
zone.
understand. Okay. Did you lose anyone close to you, and what can you tell me about them during your time in service?
No, I didn't.
Very good. And so altogether, how long were you deployed overseas?
Well, deployments, in special forces are in the form of mobile training teams. They can be long, they can be short. The one I went in Saudi Arabia was 3 months. The one I went to with the Special Operations Command Europe was stationed in Stuttgart, but they deployed units there. Sometimes staff officers went and surveyed areas that they wanted surveyed. So you can't say, what was the deployment?
Right. Sometimes
you were gone.
Right.
Sometimes you were going on some pretty long training missions.
Right.
I went one time to an exercise in Florida that lasted 3 months. We were completely on our own, working for what they call the Readiness Command at the time. And we were gone for 3 months. It was completely independent. And I was not married at the time, but some of the other guys were.
Right.
And so we had these. We had deployments to Fort Sill. These were all readiness exercises.
Sure.
But these were from short to long. I'd say you could say in special forces it was from months to years.
You went in a little bit. You went into what you did in El Salvador. What did you do in Saudi Arabia during those 3 months?
We were the Special Forces mission that is kind of unique is to organize and train indigenous forces. So we were training members of the Saudi Arabian National Guard.
Oh, see, okay.
And so, we've done this. Sometimes that mission only lasted three months. But it was, the unit we were training was rather significant, pretty close to high levels of government that they served.
Oh,
so.
See, okay. And I think you already answered this. Were you married or in a relationship? Were you married or a relationship during any time that you served?
No, I spent about 9 years single.
Okay.
And when I went to Defense Language Institute to study Spanish, I met a Greek language professor who introduced me to his daughter, his niece, who had just come to the United States to study. We met, we became engaged in 6 months' time, and I've been married ever since.
Wow, that's great. It's an honor, too. Come from a faculty member to be recommended to his niece, I would think.
Well, that was the unofficial cultural and language training I received at DLI. It had nothing to do with Spanish in Central America. It had everything to do with just meeting somebody that I didn't know, being willing to show her around. And the next thing I know, I have a Greek family, Greek vacations.
Right. That's great. So during your deployments, or during your service, how did you deal with stress?
Well, first, I think I accept stress as a normal part of life.
Okay.
And in a lot of training, you subject yourself to stress. You induce stress, into what you're doing. The best thing that I always found was to try to figure out what the source of it was. And sometimes it's a matter of just slowing down. But
tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, there's a saying sometimes when you're going when you're wanting to go fast, sometimes you do it best going slow. I think the term is festina lente. It means go fast slowly, and that's sometimes just a matter of just slowing down, taking breaths, concentrate on breathing. And a lot of people don't understand it. They take breath for granted, and said, no, you have to think about this, and that can go a great way for me to relieve stress is simply to slow down and breathe.
Right. It does affect the brain.
But mainly try to find out the source of it.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes you have a boss. Sometimes you do it yourself. Sometimes you just have a hard physical task to do and you're under stress. But
and logically, it makes sense to say that you tried to induce stress, or stress was induced during training, and I can see why that would be.
Well, you can't build muscles without stressing muscles. Weightlifting, this type of thing.
Right.
If you are stressed by the climate, you have to train in the climate.
Right.
You can't somehow just go in with no practice. So you have to subject yourself to these types of things that cause stress on the body and mind. And but mainly know where the source of it is. I think is the most important thing. There's all types of exercises that you can do, or I've done, that can alleviate stress. I mean, I'm still here.
Right.
I guess I've managed it all right. Well, it's not just special forces, but when I was in the infantry school, one of the standards that they had for everybody at that infantry center was to run 5 miles and march 25 miles and be able to demonstrate it. I think it was on a quarterly basis. It's a major thing. And you say, well, that's not hard to do. He says, well, okay, if you were told to run 5 miles within a certain time, you have to train for that.
Right. And
the training is going to induce stress. First, the requirement will stress some people. The training will stress other people, and which you eventually work through with training. So it's...
And that training was at the infantry school was implemented by...
my father.
Right. How long did you serve?
I always say I served in the Army, active Army, for 28 years. That was my maximum term of service. I count 3 years under contract to the Army as a cadet as 3 additional years. And now as a retiree, I have been retired since 2004.
Okay.
I'm subject to recall to active service, as are anybody. I learned this on the last day of my day that I retired. I asked the retirement services officer, why were you pressing me to apply for retirement? She said, because you must. That's the regulation. And I said, well, what happens if you don't? She says, then you will separate honorably, but you will draw no retirement.
Interesting.
And when I saw my DD 214 separation certificate, basically said subject to recall to active duty. And the only way out is to die or to resign. And I said, well, death will be certain, resignation unlikely, at least while I'm married, that's for sure.
Right.
But that's the way out.
Yeah.
And that was not, I was not aware of that really. Until that very last day. So now I know that at my age, I'm 66 years old. I'm a Category 3 retiree subject to recall to active duty. And the policy memorandum that kind of describes this retirement basically says it is unlikely that I will be recalled in anything but a civilian capacity. Certainly will not be replacing a lieutenant colonel who is 30, 20, 30, years younger.
Right.
But I do know that the composition of the armed forces has changed significantly to where there are a much larger civilian component than I imagined coming into the Army. In fact, when I did retire, I got a job as a Title X accepted service instructor at the Command and General Staff College, where all the classes were once taught by uniformed active serving officers. They are now taught by a majority of retired officers.
How long did you do that?
2 years.
And your rank when you left was?
My rank is Lieutenant Colonel. I'm retired.
Okay, retired Lieutenant Colonel. So
that's right.
You'd still be.
I would be recalled in that. Whether I would be doing
right.
What I would be doing, I try to imagine. I try to imagine how bad it has to get
right.
before they call me back.
Right.
Or my father, who is a retired officer, how bad it has to get before they call him back. But we are still subject to active duty recall. It says so on the discharge certificate.
Right. That is interesting. And were you awarded any medals or citations?
Mainly service awards.
Mm-hmm. Are there any specific experiences or people that you remember?
Well, I think significantly I remember my father as an example to me. I also remember a Captain Richard Epting, who was a company commander who turned me on to Special Forces in Germany.
Okay.
Served with great people. Some are still living and living well.
Right. What made you laugh?
I sometimes mention that I was on a Special Forces detachment as a commander. And we went on this exercise to Florida, where we spent a lot of time in the Yellow River swamps. Mm-hmm. Now, the Florida Ranger Camp is there, and we were basing our operation out of that. But we spent a lot of time in the woods along the river. Mm-hmm. And we found out that when you capture snakes, you can turn them in to the ranger camp, who teaches a class on snake identification.
Oh, okay.
And you can even be treated to beers in their little bar that they had there. So while we were out there, we were just catching snakes. And I've always found that the snake stories associated with that detachment were always good for a laugh, but they were instructive as well, because the Army expected you to know how to identify snakes, but people get very uncomfortable in close proximity to snakes.
Sure.
Especially rattlesnakes.
Sure.
And we had I brought one of these eastern diamondback rattlesnakes back, and our little team rooms were little interrogation rooms. They're very small, very cluttered. And this snake one time got loose in there and was loose for several weeks.
Oh my goodness.
So we would sometimes, you'd be sitting there talking with the team members and stare into a corner next to somebody, and they'd think maybe the snake was there. Or one of our medics one time came in the morning for PT, and he threw out a plastic bag, a waterproof bag that had this rattlesnake in it, and he said, "Here's your snake." And he said he had come in the night before to get his PT equipment. Snake had obviously gone into his PT bag, and when he got up to put on his shoes, the snake rolled out in front of his wife and mother-in-law. So
oh my goodness!
It's pretty funny, but
oh my goodness!
But it was instructive. You had to know how to identify snakes. Normally, it's done with pictures. We had a real snake, and the snake had more time in the battalion than some of the soldiers. But
hopefully, he or she benefited from the training.
Well, we did, and it was just one of these things that you can say that talk about bravery and things like this. People, I don't care how brave they are, get nervous around snakes.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine that I would spend much time trying to identify a snake. It's just a snake.
Well, it was good for a lot of stories. How we caught them, what happened, and we used to use this snake it was just sitting in a terrarium, and sometimes if you had a briefing that you had to give, sometimes people would be distracted by or enchanted by the presence of this snake.
Sure.
And so they you kind of get an advantage, So I thought there was a psychological advantage to having the snake, but the stories are pretty funny.
Yeah, that is funny. Now, you had an interesting response to this one in our conversation offline, and so I'd like for you to expand on it a little bit. Did you experience any discrimination? And if you did, do you feel that this hindered your career in any way? Well,
I think, first of all, we have to say that the Army, like any organization, discriminates among its members. Selection is done centrally, assignments are done remotely, and all of this is based on an evaluation system that has to identify people as outstanding to inadequate. That the system changes somewhat, whether you use numbers 5 being top or 1 being bottom, or outstanding being the best and inadequate being
right.
You have to assign people into these categories, and hopefully they will be accurate, and there will be some kind of narrative that justifies that. So I would say yes, it does discriminate. I would also say that even within the Army, there are insiders and outsiders. That if you come into a unit, you are an outsider. If you are have or prior service with certain commanders, you are an insider. There is discrimination there, but it's not so much based on race, gender, or these other factors. It's based on who knows who you know.
Right.
And the need to be able to differentiate for promotion or assignments or school selections and all these. But I had a good career. I did the types of things I like to do. So I don't feel I was discriminated against. Would I have gone further in the Army? I don't think so. Special Forces is small.
Right.
I spent a lot of time in what they call Special Forces not assigned to Special Forces group, which means I worked for the Army Materiel Command, I worked for Unified Command, I worked for Allied Strategic Commands. And when you are not in units or you are not in certain conflicts, you are an outsider. That's right. So it's not what we would think of as negative discrimination. Right. It just simply means you weren't in the right place or thing. But I never felt that anyone looked at me and said that who I am is a reason why I was not didn't go further.
Right, and the interesting thing with regard to you in particular is your father being a major general, your father being the commander of the infantry school at Benning and or at the brigade, 197th Brigade, correct?
197th Brigade, yeah.
And that would leave the son of the father open to some discrimination, which is what interests me about that answer. Is you could very well have been exposed to some discrimination. Your father was not not always an easygoing guy.
No, I've never met anybody who was in the undecided about my father and his commands. I only met people who admired him and those people who did not.
Right.
And as I may have mentioned, that I'd one time, one of the initiatives at the Infantry Center was to take the Expert Infantryman's badge.
Right.
And I competed for it and didn't get it. But my TAC officer one time told me shortly after the test, he said there were some people who were hoping that I would fail. Right. Because the the Expert Infantryman's badge was a complex, resource-heavy event, and it was done for the first time with our class.
I see.
So a lot of people had to do it, and they, of course, clearly, he told me, he said, some people hope I fail, which I did, but...
That also shows you that there was not anyone up above with their thumb on the scale in your favor.
Kind of you're talking about funny stories. Here at ROTC, there was a black cadet named Bob Wilcox. And Bob was in the library one time, and he must have spotted me walking across to the library. And when I went and I saw him in the library, he says, I just saw you and I thought, that brother's got funny looking hair, because I'm relatively dark, notice. But I never forgot, he says, his brother's got funny hair. So, it turned out it's me.
Right. There you go. Well, so you might have experienced discrimination without even knowing it.
You can be damned by praise. Too.
Right. That's very true. Very true.
They have a rating scheme one time to where they changed it to where the senior rater, used to be called endorser, had to assign you to a block representing 1 to 100 people, with about, let's say, most of them being in the center, but at the top one, at the bottom one, and this system sometimes you could see how putting somebody, say, in the second block can basically be a problem. So this is something that they always have to reevaluate and deal with. But you could say that being assigned to the wrong block because you are remotely connected or hardly known by your senior rater, or if you are rated by a civilian or by a foreign officer, which I had, then okay, so is that discrimination? No, that's just the way it is. It's not being in the right place. But I don't regret anything, and I don't think I was punished. I'm happy with how my career turned out.
And I know this to be so, but talk with me a little bit, or I believe this to be so, but talk with me about retiring as a lieutenant colonel in Special Forces is that generally, if you stay in Special Forces or Special Operations, is that generally where you max out?
A lot, yes.
Yeah.
A lot of it depends on when you went in, because they don't, at least in the officers, they don't take them in from the ground level. You have to have had to be qualified in your basic branch.
Right.
In my case, I had gone to the infantry center for infantry training. I had gone to the armor center for advanced officer training. And then I went to the Special Forces qualification course. So I had been in the Army. I was a captain. And I served in Special Forces for 5 years, which is a relatively long period for an officer in the same battalion.
I see. Okay.
But when I mentioned that I got into this business where you get assigned outside into security assistance, you get assigned to the Army Material Command. They want you for special operations expertise.
Right.
So you are essentially advising or organizing and training our own forces, sometimes a contracting officer, to explain what the Special Forces want in materiel requirements.
Right.
Sometimes the requirement's not clear. They need to have somebody in-house who can explain this. So I was serving there, and believe it or not, this serving in different staff positions was actually a very good transition to civilian life, because it was like a consultant.
I see.
And they said there are some people who may have followed command routes to where they had staffs serving them, and then when they get out, they said, "There's your computer, there's your system." That's kind of a difficult adjustment for some people to make. So I felt that, okay, I had interesting jobs, different levels, but I was basically a consultant, and so it was not hard for me to adjust coming out. I retired overseas, which is not advised, because you cannot stay in Europe unless you have a job. Oh. You can't just wander around looking for a job.
Right.
You'd have to work with, I applied, I think at one time, for a job for U.S. Army Europe, for a job that I thought I met all the qualifications. When I saw the response, they said, "You're not qualified." And I said, well, this is an example of civil service where someone's already lined up for it. Right. And they have to go through the motions of opening it up. Right. I said, okay, that's real, not a problem. I didn't especially want to stay there, but we had a good school situation for the family. We like the international community.
Yes.
But Europe is not the place to retire if you don't have a job.
Right.
And so I came back to Arlington because they give you a year to decide where you want to go.
Yeah.
And my family was here. I didn't have a job, so they sent me back to where I entered the Army, which was Arlington.
I see.
So,
other than your father, was there anyone else, anyone you served with who influenced, or served for, or served under, that influenced you?
well, I always think my uncle was an infantry officer. He also served as an advisor in Thailand. He served in Vietnam as well.
Yes.
But he also did a master's degree program at the University of Texas. So I got to, that influenced me quite a bit.
Yes.
And he had a pretty interesting civilian career after that.
Right.
All of which, common interests and things like this. So my uncle, Rex Latham, was influential. I always think of my first platoon sergeant, Edward Boyle. Great guy. Always wonder what happened to him, but anyway, he's memorable. And then, of course, my members of my SF detachments that I was with, I still have contacts with them.
Oh, that's great.
So, it's haven't, but by names, my father, my uncle, Epting, Boyle, and then just my detachment members.
Right.
These were people that I remember, but well, I had an interesting. I was in the Army Special Operations Command as a staff officer, and my raider was a fellow named Stan Pritchard, good man. He one time relayed to me that my senior raider, who was an Army colonel, mentioned to him that he felt that I was not driven. And I thought, is that a compliment or is that a criticism? And I have to say that I had never felt driven by anybody.
Interesting.
And in fact, my father, when I told him I was going to go into Special Forces, he told me, good, essential, important path. He says, but it is restricted.
Yes.
You will not have the same opportunities as an infantry officer.
Right.
But, he was just telling it like it was.
Yes.
And, but, he gave me good advice. Captain Epting had been a Special Forces officer. He, I think, stayed as an infantry officer. Special Forces was not a branch.
Right.
It was a specialty.
Yes.
So, he, just by his demonstration, showed me what was possible, or what looked interesting. So these people I remember, but there have been a lot of people who, I've come across which I don't think especially influenced me or inspired me any other way other than the ones we've already spoken.
Sure. Is there anything that reminds you of your time in the service? Smells, sounds, tastes?
You're going to think this is strange. My bagpipe, which is sitting behind this screen.
Which we will, which I did want to talk to, and now's as good a time as any. Okay. Tell me about that. Tell me how you got, how you became what do you call someone who plays the bagpipes?
Piper.
A piper. How did that come about?
When I always liked bagpipe music. It never occurred to me to learn to play it. When I retired, I was working for a funeral home as a funeral home director, or funeral director's assistant. Drove limousines and support vehicles. And I was out at Greenwood Cemetery one time and I heard a bagpipe. And I saw the piper. He's a fellow named Bob Richardson. He lives here in Arlington. He's well known in the piping community. And I got to know him. And I asked him simply, hey, Bob, what do you think of an older person taking up pipes? And he says, well, you order a chanter, get an instructor, or get a tutorial. There's only 9 notes.
Oh, is that so?
That's right. And he says, and start. So I started in self-study.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got to where I could play a few tunes. Uh-huh. And I went out to, I go to UTA and play. Yeah. I know Corporal Randy Johnson. He's comes to talk to me whenever I'm out playing, but I'd always meet people there around the baseball stadium or football stadium, and I'd talk to them. They'd hear the pipe and they would come. And there was a lady one time who came to dump some yard waste into a receptacle that they had set up there, and she said to me, she says, "Where's your kilt?" I said, "I don't have one." She says, "Get one." And so I thought, okay, maybe there's some potential for this.
Right.
So anyway, I just kind of pursued it, and I do meet with a school called the Balmoral School of Piping and Drumming, and I like to think I'm on good terms with instructors, some of which are champions, but world champions, but we meet in a class in summertime. It was in Pennsylvania. Now it's remote on Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
So when I'm listening to my instructor in Canada, I can hear him tune his pipe from my little RV outside, little trailer. Uh-huh. And when I'm playing my pipe, my instructor in Glasgow can help me tune my bagpipe.
I see.
And so you say, well, why is this remind me of the Army? Well, piping music is sometimes seen as not just an instrument of enchantment, it's seen as an instrument of war, and at one time was outlawed under law in the United Kingdom. But it has a distinctive sound, a distinctive presence. To play even for a short period of time takes a lot of preparation. So I always say it's like special operations. It's unusual. It's characterized by long preparation time for short time on target.
Right.
And it has a psychological effect, which you can feel.
Yes.
And I have to say, I've never met anybody who didn't like it or who didn't come to see where it was coming from. And good people, goodwill. So I see it as a kind of a communication thing, but it has all the characteristics of a special operation.
Interesting.
And so
it's very traditional in the military. You do think of it. I think of The Longest Day. Is that the movie The Longest Day? Is that where?
Well, actually, the son of that piper, Bill Millen, is a Facebook friend of mine.
Is that so?
Yeah.
And so you think about it in terms of bravery, because these guys would tune up their pipes and they'd be playing their pipes marching through.
Well, it makes you think sometimes what is a weapon?
Right.
What is he said, well, you can't believe that someone could somehow play. Playing bagpipe is complex. It's there's only 9 notes, but you have 4 tuning points, 4 reeds that you have to tune.
Wow.
You have to maintain steady blow pressure, or it goes flat or sharp.
Right.
And you have to memorize the tunes because you can't walk with music.
Right.
So you have to know it, and even written pipe music is not always the way it's played. So there's exceptions
and nuances.
And that's right.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's completely unique. Some people would not even consider it nice to hear. But I've never encountered anybody like that.
And you said something else. How do you define a weapon? And psychologically, that might be a pretty strong weapon.
Well, there was a reason after the Battle of Culloden, when they basically tried to eradicate the Highland culture. They made wearing of plaid illegal, playing of pipes illegal. If you there are some recorded instances in history where people tried to claim they were not soldiers because they were just pipers, and they said, "Well, we've never seen where soldiers were not accompanied by pipers." Mm-hmm. So they hang you back then.
Wow.
And so he said, "Well, okay, what's that? What is this?" Anyway, it captured my imagination in retirement, and I had occasion to play for some friends and family and this type of thing. I don't play in a band; I just play by myself.
And at events along with the Cadet Corps Alumni Council and I imagine the Medal of Honor Parade and those things. Are you participating in those as well?
In fact, the Cadet Corps Alumni Council some time ago formed a marching contingent, mainly of old Sam Houston Rifles. Right. And at that point, my only recommendation was to add pipes.
Sure.
And so we managed that. One of the tunes that I recognized in learning pipes was what they call the Sam Houston Rifles hymn, or the Jody hymn, is actually a variation of an old tune called "Will You Know Come Back Again." Oh. And when I was kind of looking for tunes, I don't always select them based on an instructor because I'm by myself.
Sure.
But I would go and look to see what the title says, and then look to see what the lyrics say. And when I heard a clip of this, and I've heard this before. Turned out it was the Jody hymn. So
interesting.
In the in our various activities, I played that, and I'd say some of them recognize it. Some of them don't recognize it because they think everything the only thing that a bagpipe plays is Amazing Grace. Says, right. No, but it's the Jody hymn,
right?
And it's Will You Know Come Back Again.
Yeah.
And so it's there's a message to it.
Sure.
And the instrument, of course, it wouldn't quite be the same if you played it on a piano. I think.
Right. Oh, of course not.
Certainly not marching in a parade.
No.
But we've done that, and that's how I came across the Scottish American Military Society, because they were marching in a parade with flags, and I was marching with our group with a bagpipe and wearing a kilt. And they came to ask me what was my Scottish connection, and I have to say that in my family, we never gave it much thought.
Right.
Although since then we find out that the names are Ulster Scots, I think they called it.
Okay.
My grandmother was from Ireland. Her name was Murdoch. Names like Templeton. Latham is sometimes seen on both sides of the border in England, northern England and Scotland, pronounced as I pronounce my name. So, but we never had that family connection. Now we seem to have a connection.
So it's almost a spiritual thing in a way.
Well, it's kind of interesting at this time of my life. I'm able to see where certain things have kind of intersected.
Yeah.
And you say, well, I don't think I planned it that way.
Right.
But it came about, and I'm grateful for it. So.
Right. So, are you involved in any veterans organizations right now, or have you been since you left the military?
Well, I was a member of the local SAMS, Scottish American Military Society post. Not a life member. I just renewed it annually, and I haven't been with them because I've been unable to attend their events. Right. Still maintain some contact, but no real active affiliation. I have played at Veterans Day events out at for Arlington.
Yes.
So it's not membership, but certainly interested in those veterans issues.
But you are still actively involved with the Cadet Corps Alumni Council, which would be one of those veterans organizations, I think.
Well, I think it is. Yeah. As I say, it's I'm the historian, and I'm not looking to write the historian
I didn't know that.
History or anything, but I have been able to go through and write what you call information papers with pictures and stuff, and just from my old staff officer days, always writing information papers and things like this. And so that was the format I chose. And so I stay in touch. From time to time, the battalion asks to have a number of us alumni members to come and talk to them about what we're doing, what we did, what we think. And so I like to, I've done that a couple of times. And, but as I say, I live very close. I can come and do that whenever they want.
What did you do after you left the military?
Well, when I retired, I was in Belgium, didn't have a job, had to come back to some place in the United States, and I came back to Arlington. My family is here, parents, grandparents, some of my siblings are here, and close to an airport, so we can get to my wife's family in Greece. But anyway, I came back here basically for family reasons, and then began to look for a job. I applied and got a job at the Command and General Staff College in Fort Leavenworth as an instructor of joint and combined multinational operations, operational strategic level studies. Not especially popular with many of the students who will not be working at that level, but to me it was good. 2-year appointment. You could resign any time. They could release you any time in that appointment, and you had the option to reapply. But it is a accredited master's degree awarding institution. You've got to have you have academic ranks. You don't have tenure, but you have all these appointees. So I did that I got that job right away, about 6 months after I arrived here. And I did that for 2 years. I was up in Fort Leavenworth, had an apartment there, and then decided I didn't want to hang around up there on weekends, so I commuted back and forth to here, Arlington, every weekend and holidays. And worked up there, but decided I didn't want to do that anymore. So at the end of my term, I gave notice and resigned. Came back here, and I got a job as a substitute with the Arlington Independent School District.
I see.
Working mainly Bailey Junior High School, where I once attended, and Arlington High School, where my sons attended, and nephews and nieces and all this type of thing. Local school. And then I also got a job with the Arlington Funeral Home, the Greenwood Mount Olivet Company. Again, these are at-will work. You don't have to do everything that they ask you to do. They don't have to guarantee you anything, and they pay you by the hour.
Wow.
So anyway, I did that sort of as a way of community service, but it's also interesting. I would have never got into these as a career. Didn't want to become a teacher or didn't want to become a funeral director, but I liked the people I was with, and thought I was doing something that was useful. And
there's freedom in that too.
Well, there is at-will work. You don't have to promise anything. You don't have to expect anything. If it all works together, then it's good. And I did that for about 10, 12 years.
That's it.
But I worked for my parents. They have a small tree farm, my old dad's homestead in East Texas, and I help him whenever he says. When he says go, we go.
Right.
So
how many acres is that?
It's about 250. And a lot of it is acreage that his grandfather had. His grandfather had 10 children.
Right.
So it was all distributed and went under different owners over the years. And my dad is kind of built on that, and it's a actual tree farm. He's got a very good stewardship program designed to balance the forest and with timber. Wildlife management, water management, and he's done a very good job with it. He's actually won an award. He was the Texas Tree Farm of the Year back in the 80s.
Mm.
But he runs a good operation, and I help him whenever he says.
And that's in Linden, right?
That's in Linden, Cass County.
And how long has this land been in your family?
Oh, my father was earlier in the 20th century. The family came from South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and my father, born in 1927, was born in El Dorado, where my grandfather had gone to work in oil fields.
Oh, okay.
So they had been from Cass County. He went, married, met my grandmother. They married, had some children. My father was born there. Then they moved back to Cass County, and that's where they lived. My father, when he was old enough, decided he did not want to be a farmer, and he went into the Navy.
Right.
So he's World War II era, but after the war, he served in North Africa as, I think, air traffic controller with the Navy.
Right, in Morocco.
Morocco.
Yeah.
And then he came back with NTAC and was commissioned in the Army.
Right. So, but your roots here in Arlington go back a long way, and your roots in Texas go back even longer.
Well, at least there's some now, they've done some work to find out, well, okay, it's South Carolina is where they originally came from. There is some indication that maybe someone of Thomas Latham came on the Mayflower or something like this. But anyway, we're finding more Lathams than I thought are around.
Right.
How they're connected to us, I'm not sure.
Right.
But,
so would you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, I was going to say the only other thing, my wife is now handling a lot of family matters in Greece.
Oh, okay.
And also for an aunt in England. So she does a lot of that, a lot of it by internet now because of travel restrictions and COVID. Right. But I help her with that. You know, I can't really manage detailed business, family business in Greece. I can help her with whatever she needs. So, so that's kind of another aspect of my family focus.
Certainly keeps you busy.
Yeah.
If you could serve all over again, would you do it? And would you do it in the same way?
I like the way it turned out, and I learned a lot. I would do it as I did. I would hopefully would be able to benefit from everything I've learned this time. Right. So I could maybe avoid some of the mistakes that I made when I was younger. But no, I always thought I was going somehow into the service. And although I served in the Army a long time, both of my sons are in education. And one is a coach, a PE coach for special ed in Allen. He's also a tennis coach. He is had champion tennis players under his supervision. He has a ring to attest to that, state ring. Wow. My other son is a English professor out at Midland College. Oh, okay. And my brief time as a substitute teacher has shown me that public or teaching is a service in a way which you cannot overstate. They didn't go into the military, but they're doing something which is as important as I think I might have done or other people think military service. They are in the service of their communities and their teaching, and
they're molding young lives.
Well, and even in the special forces, when I thought I was going to get into high-speed commando operations, some people told me the main business is teaching. And I found that, I was employed to teach foreign troops and also our own troops. And you can always say, well, teacher is only as effective as students are willing to learn, but got to have it.
Right. So how often do you return to campus, and what do you think of the changes that have gone on there since you were initially young cadet?
Well, since I moved back here, I've always been within walking distance or cycling distance to that university. The times I've been there, particularly like programs at night, I come out of there and I think I'm back in student walking down in front of the library or walking in front of College Hall. I'm impressed that that new Brazos Park, if you look at it from up past College Hall, it looks like the building is still there.
Right.
And so I sometimes have some feelings.
That was your dorm still?
No, I wasn't in a dorm.
Okay.
I lived in apartments
Okay.
with friends and cousins and stuff like this.
Okay.
So they didn't have the student housing then that they have now.
Okay. Well, yeah. Certainly not the quality, but I know the Jodys were, Brazos Hall was their...
I wasn't part of that.
Yeah.
I was on the team, but I wasn't part of that.
Yeah, okay. What advice do you have for people entering the military now?
I would say, first of all, Google the acronym METTC. And when you do that, you're going to find it talking about in Army language, and you're also going to talk it in corporate language. Because it talks about analysis of what you're there for. What does your organization do? The mission of the Army is to fight wars on the land.
Right.
That's what it is, and to win. It is not to better the education of people in this country. Although a lot of people, I benefited,
Sure.
from it. But the mission is pretty clear. It is to fight wars. Who is the enemy? Where will these operations be conducted? The United States has the world divided into unified commands.
Right.
Pacific, Central or Asia, Europe, Africa, and our U.S., North America, South America. So that's where you could be. And some people find that even though they're living or posted to the Pacific Ocean, they're finding themselves in Central Asia. So I said, look and see what all this means to you, because it may differ from your goals. The second thing I would say is how much time do you have available for military service? And I've had people say, well, I'm prepared to give myself 12/7 to military service. You can't do that.
Right.
You can't do it. You may want to do it,
Right.
but you can't do it, and not for very long. And I said, on the other hand, the average life expectancy in this country is about late 70s. You're not going to be serving in an active capacity into your late 70s. I am a Category 3 retiree. I have a role. I can't imagine how bad it has to be before I have to be recalled.
Right.
But I'm not going to be doing the same things I did when I left the service back in 2004. I'm still at service. I just don't have to report to anybody. I have to maintain myself physically. I have to try to keep up with what's going on in the world and what's going on in the Army. But anyway, you have to decide how much time do you want to devote. I found that I was aware that in a study that if you were to make the Army a career, you must leave not one day past 20 years. And you must spend the 10 years prior to that preparing yourself for that transition, get the necessary education, network, find out where you can apply these skills. He says, and retiring at age 50 in Europe with no job, you're not as employable as you may wish.
Right.
I wasn't.
Sure.
And I fell into something that I found interesting, but it wasn't like starting a career. You have to be a little more deliberate. And part of it is to say, how much time do you have available or will you make available? Obviously in service, if you're injured or something like that, you're done.
Right.
You may get disability, you may get a lot of things, but you're not going to continue full strength for past a period of time.
Right.
So how much time have you got? Really, one of the other things I would say, consider the value of a government security clearance. You have to stand an investigation to get that, and you have to conduct yourself in a way that you will always keep it.
Right.
And I said, a lot of people don't think about this, but I can say that some of the security clearances are quite valuable in civilian life.
Sure.
especially if it has any connection with government.
Mm-hmm.
So consider that. The only other point I mentioned was about not knowing how to rate a more experienced soldier. Give some thought to the evaluation rating system that's extant, and come to terms with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's difficult. And I don't think I ever had any kind of training. I one time was in staff college, and I asked a general officer, I said, "You are a senior rater. How would you advise us to plan our senior rating profile so that it's credible?" And I was rather disappointed with his answer. He said, "Well, because the people that you work with are chosen by you, you will rate them all at the top, and then you will periodically restart your profile." I was disappointed with that answer.
Yeah.
Because I never had the choice to choose people who work.
Right.
Of course, I said I'm not a general officer either.
Right.
But I know that this is an issue. Grade or rating and inflation is a major issue.
Right.
So give some thought to it. Mm-hmm. How would you rate somebody, your peer, your subordinate troops, your younger troops, your older troops? Because it's going to come. And it may come really quick in your first year. It did for me. And give it some thought. Well, my first rating system went from outstanding to inadequate.
Right.
In between, there was superior and effective. And I was told by one colleague, he said, if you rate somebody as effective, that may be exactly what it is. That's a good thing. You're effective in what you do. He said, that'll tube your career.
Right.
If you get one of them, or if you get sometimes a point or two taken off, he said, what are you trying to say?
Right.
And on the other hand, you think that how are you personally going to deal with this?
Right.
Are you going to be crushed by being called effective? Or are you going to crush by being have a couple points dismissed, that you're not outstanding,
right,
that you're not superior, that you're just effective? I said, come to grips with that, because they'll be done with you sooner than you may wish.
Yes.
And in my view, they sent me a letter saying, you are reaching maximum term of service. You will be separated on this state. It was 28 years from when I came in. Mm-hmm. If I had been promoted, I would maybe been able to stay 30 years. Mm-hmm. But it was 28 years. They're done.
Right.
Now, as I say, I've got a commitment which I take seriously. Some people may not, but I do. And I say, if they call me to active duty, I'll do whatever they say.
Right. And
they will probably pay me at the appropriate rate. Says, but will I be replacing, say, a younger officer? No.
Right.
That's not expected. But I can still have a role. I'm still trying to imagine what it might be. Mm-hmm. Maybe give some thought to that while you're thinking about a military career, or if you're only going in for reserve or going in for a term period, do your best, give it your best, but they'll be done with you when your term's up.
Right. Is there anything that you would like to add to this interview that I have not mentioned?
No, I was going to say, if you have anything to ask that has not been asked, ask away, because this has given me an opportunity to kind of look back at a lot of points in my life. And so it's been a useful exercise for me. I appreciate you having me to do this. And so if you have any other questions you'd like to ask, like who is this dog sitting here? This is Lucy.
There's Lucy, and she's on camera now.
See, I don't wear a watch. She keeps me on time.
Oh, is that what it is?
Yeah. She gets us up in the morning. She tells me when to take her for a walk. And I had a Norwegian officer one time who told me, he said, you should always walk your dog every day, whether you have one or not.
Okay. And so, that's understandable. That makes sense. Yeah.
So she's got a role.
That's good. Well, I really appreciate your time. I really appreciate your insight. This has been quite enjoyable, and It's nice to have another Latham in the collection. And who knows, maybe there are more Lathams yet to come, and we shall see. But thank you for your time, and thank you for your hospitality.
You're welcome. Yeah.
And we will end it here.
Well, I don't see we'll end it.
Yeah, it'll be ended.
See you around till another time.
Yeah, see you next time.